Hello, welcome to today's DAV chat. Thanks for tuning in. How is everyone doing? I know it's still a tumultuous few hours as we wait for Biden's inauguration. Some are able to fully embrace the celebratory moment, today being the last day that a woman has never been vice president of the United States. That changes tomorrow. Hello, Alan. For others, last minute rabbits Trump is pulling out of the hat, like a pardon for criminal Steve Bannon, who's awaiting trial for his part in fleecing Trump supporters of their hard-earned money or not so hard-earned money to pay for a privately built section of the wall due to their frustration in perhaps Trump getting mocked for not building a wall fast enough, or for just to be able to actualize their anti-migrant sentiments. 13 hours to go, very exciting. Hi, Phil. Hi, Cosmic Rose. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining in. So what else is news? We're worried about Steve Bannon. Trump is proposing to massively sabotage the Republican Party by starting a new political party called the Patriot Party. It's almost like as though if you join it, you are requesting an invitation to be investigated by the FBI for joining the insurrection efforts at the Capitol, the violent armed attempt to overthrow the Capitol. We're lucky it wasn't that armed, but we've seen people use hammers from their backpack to smash windows. We've seen people use flagpoles as weapons to attack police officers. We've seen people use bullhorns to organize and direct the movement of people, the more gormless section of the rioters, to direct them up the stairs towards Nancy Pelosi's office. One of the more interesting characters, fortunately now arrested, is Riley June Williams, that attractive young woman who was very decisively telling people where to go. And it may turn out that she's one of the people who attended the Capitol on the day before as a potential guest of a Republican lawmaker. So we know that Lauren Boebert is under investigation for having potentially given tours to insurrectionists. There were certainly people captured on film that was then shared on Parler or captured on film by journalists who also attended the riot in order to capture footage for people. Footage of people saying very directly where things are. Would you like to see any of that footage? Because I can show you. ProPublica categorized a lot of footage, and actually New Yorker did as well. Let's look at a tiny bit of the New Yorker footage, perhaps. New Yorker. I showed a little bit to you yesterday, but we can look at some more. All right, thanks for waiting. Videos, they organize them, which is a public service. All right. There is a movement in Colorado to remove Lauren Boebert, which is lovely. But yes, I imagine that ousting lawmakers on the backs of people signing things is going to be relatively difficult. Okay. All right. If federal charges are carried down the street to the NYDA's office, Bannon will be in court. I'm glad you said that, Alan. I was hoping that some of the charges against Bannon could be translatable to state charges, because he really has done so much harm to his country. He's such a nihilist in a true sense of the word, and that he wants things to collapse, just to be responsible for doing things, I think. Bannon is the person who saw the potential in harnessing disaffected, psychologically unmoored young men who he saw profusely weigh into a debate on whether or not women were being unfairly advantaged in the world of computer game design. That was Gamergate. And Bannon, observing that, sought to harness that energy and that activity from those disaffected young men towards politics. And that was a potent realization. Steve Bannon also helped direct the activities of Cambridge Analytica, which harvested the data, the stolen data of over 80 million American Facebook users. All right, shall we listen to this dude?
Six trying to take out Trump, right? And they think they're going to win again? They're not winning. It ain't happening. It ain't happening.
Cheaters don't win.
No, cheaters lose. There is no way that we're going to give the keys to the White House over to, I got hairy legs. And I learned a lot about cockroaches and kids jumping on my lap.
Yeah.
Like 0-6. And they're like 0-6 trying to take out Trump.
All right, so that's these small colorful lines at the top indicate different videos that have been all organized chronologically and are color coordinated for their locations. So there's videos from around DC, from near the Capitol, and from inside the Capitol at different times. So there's more gaps in the video length there, but you can see some of the early footage.
Fight for Trump! Fight for Trump! Fight for Trump! Fight for...
I mean, I don't really need to show this footage now, do I? Just we've seen a lot of it. I just don't want Americans to forget how easily right-wing Christian insurrectionists start to imagine they need to violently take over the country because they think that they're within their rights to do so. They have a sense of entitlement that propels them to believe that they own the country and that they can violate laws to do so. Now, that belief is strengthened by a catalyst such as Donald Trump, who harnesses the willingness of people to become addicted to that type of praise, that they are special, that their racism is logical, that their protectiveness of their own interests is really altruism for their country. And sadly, their own interests are not at all served by fascism. To a degree, Trump has turned his energies and attention to inflating the stock market as much as he could, because that was his re-election platform, to point to the stock market as if it was the only thing that represented the economy and claim victory. Fascists understand that you can tell a lot of lies and you can tell a lot of big lies, but it helps to periodically have some data point that you can at least claim is reliable. Oh yes, and when Alan says he pocketed millions for personal use, we're talking about Steve Bannon, who's just been pardoned by the disgraced president of the United States. And not for much longer, but apparently not all the paperwork has been signed yet. I'm not holding out much hope, though, because Trump does owe Steve Bannon a lot. So even though they feuded after Steve Bannon told that dude who wrote a book, it wasn't Woodward, someone wrote a book on Trump earlier, and Steve Bannon granted him a lot of highly personal, loose-lipped interview time, which apparently precipitated a falling out between the two men. It's just important to remember what was taken from the United States. So I hope that people do more and write more exposés on how Trump unleashed COVID on the American population to the extent that it has ravaged your public health systems, your population, and your economy. And yes, and I also want to not just take democracy for granted and to keep up challenging Republicans, to take advantage of the fact that a lot of them are starting to realize that they were abused by Trump. Oh, look, Pumpkin, if you're still believing that Trump has won the election, is that what you happen to believe? Because I would say that reality is substantiating my understanding of the world more than it's substantiating yours, and that my knowledge and my beliefs are more concordant with reality. People whose ego has been gratified by Trumpism, people who've been told to identify with him, that their aggrieved masculinity or their aggrieved sense of, I've been villainized for being white and male. Look, that's fair. You shouldn't be villainized purely for being white and male. It is not a poor character decision to be white and male. I myself am married to a white male and have a white male child. Character matters. And making broad generalizing statements about people from superficial configurations of their body, phenotypic presentation, is not a good way to encourage good character. Just as people don't like being discriminated against or typecast by police officers, so too white men feel protective of their reputations. But another thing that many white men, not all, many right-leaning white men and many far left-leaning white men too actually feel protective of is their tribal group. So if you identify your interests as belonging only with other white men, then you are incapable of embracing a political culture and a political social climate that is multicultural. So when I say white nationalism, maybe I'll take the white out and I'll start saying monoculture terrorists, people who are willing to fight to preserve America as white and Christian and patriarchal. It is true that there's not a great deal of point arguing with the Trump cult. I watched a cult specialist, a psychologist who, as a young man, was a member of the Moonies cult. And as an adult, he is now a psychologist specializing in deprogramming cult victims. And he says, and I think it's very important to be specific about this, he says loved ones and family members, people who legitimately care about those who have fallen into a cult, are people with the greatest capacity to help them out. Which means we don't have to take collective responsibility for deprogramming QAnon MAGA cult members. We can't do that. Circumstances now lend themselves towards helping those people leave the cult because reality has become glaringly obvious to them that all of the QAnon prophecies that there would be arrests and that Trump would reign forever in his magical MAGA throne, they are being disproven by the preparations for Biden's inauguration and the Biden-Harris team preparing to lead America through or out of all of the multitudinous crises created and amplified and extended by Trump and his various co-conspirators in the Republican Party and in the broader Republican billionaire donor class. You would like us to say hello to August. Hello, August. Do some of these folks have the depth to understand the error of their ways? Well, it's very comprehensive when you get sucked into a cult. You subsume your identity into it, and you put all of your emotional eggs in the basket of being proved right. So you don't just have some opinions, you live your opinions, and you tell everybody of your opinions and that you are definitely right. And you don't leave any wiggle room because that's what the cult asks of you. It asks you to show your loyalty by believing more and more ludicrous things. And the payoff for that loyalty is that you feel embraced by a glow of shared tribal identity with your fellow lunatics. Let me be nice about it. With your fellow violent cult members. Someone from Detroit, MK, born in Detroit, says many white men have been extended a privilege that people of color did not have in the US. Yes, and people's susceptibility to this cult is a product of white backlash that has been as part of a pattern that is observable across time, that many Americans seeing a rise in power amongst Black Americans have responded violently, have responded by being paranoid that sexual crimes were taking place against white women, and trying to burn things and damage property. After the attack on democracy, the GOP wants unity. Yes, well, when they are exposed for whatever reason, after a period of exposure, Republicans act protectively to say, okay, we'll make a transaction then in which we acknowledge that somebody's culpable of something. So maybe Trump did something wrong and he incited some violence. And so to get over that, we require you to exchange admitting something, some particle of a thing about Trump being not the best, with you then saying you're going to make concessions to us. That's our exchange. We'll admit to a bit of reality and you concede to us for comity's sake, for forgiveness and healing. You give us pardons for things we might have done other than that. And that's not an okay transaction to happen, but it's what they do because they will always try and grasp for whatever power they can. And we can condemn that power grab, or we can just resist it and say, no, we've developed our muscles now. Our muscles are stronger at resisting you because there's no longer as broad a passivity towards white Christian nationalists where you say, oh, well, look, they think they're doing the right thing, so maybe they're good people, even if our idea of goodness doesn't concord with their idea of goodness, we'll just still let them go on their merry way. More people now are much more observant of the damage that it does, letting those people who believe that they're right, who believe that a monoculture is the best path forwards for the United States. There was a tolerance of them that was probably a product of 9/11 backlash, to think, oh, well, maybe they have a point. Maybe multiculturalism has an inherent danger to it because then you allow migrants, some of whom may train to fly planes, some of whom may then fly a plane into your tallest, relatively tall buildings in your financial district in one of your major cities and cause thousands of deaths and horrify people for decades. Well, for many years. How long has it been? 20 years. Whoa. It's going to be 20 years in September, isn't it? So that act and that level of terrorism has the capacity to affect what happens and affect hearts and minds and risk calculations for a long time. So because of that risk calculation that perhaps America was prone to indulging the white nationalists who argued fervently in favor of monoculture. Even if they didn't do so openly, they were doing so covertly. Republicans were getting away with gerrymandering districts to reduce the political potency of people of color, disenfranchising people of color by making it more difficult for them to vote and making it more difficult for their votes to count by drawing districts that isolated the people of color in chunks so that their votes weren't disparate enough to win Democratic victories for Democratic candidates, to reduce the political power of people of color, and therefore by cutting them out of the political process in that way, making their needs less likely to be met by privileging the needs of white Americans who still, even after all of this privileging and all of this gerrymandering that complemented the pre-existing white affirmative action nature of the electoral college system, still had a sense of grievance. So white people had the electoral college system, which gives smaller, less populous, more rural states a disproportionate power within the system of electing a president. And then gerrymandering at the state level, which created districts that corralled Black people into voting districts, allowing white votes to have more political potency. And then still white people who watch Fox News taught to feel that they are being excluded from an important thing, which is the protected classes of anti-discrimination legislation that says, yes, businesses are free to discriminate against others, free to fire people at will, etc., etc. But then because of social progress in the United States, pockets of social progress, protected classes such as women and transgender people and intersex people and gay people and people of color, they were all enfolded into a legislative section saying don't discriminate or don't be caught out discriminating. So as long as you kept your discriminatory motivations to yourself, you could potentially still get away with it. But if it was evident, if you made remarks that gave your actions away or gave your motivations away, then you could be sued successfully for firing somebody because they're Black or abusing them in the workforce and then firing them. That could be evidence. Now, when people say, and they often say, oh, Republicans just supported Trump for judges. I'm somebody who's newish to American politics, and I've always wanted to Americans to give up as much shorthand as they can, to make things more explicit where possible in order to build consensus, because it makes people feel special to use acronyms and shortcuts to communicate because that's more efficient. But really, especially in times of fascism, you need to build up your popular support so that it becomes a mass movement that can rival and defeat the mass movement of fascism, because fascism always employs an appeal to ego. Fascism is called using emotions to convey superiority rather than facts that they have superior policies that will benefit more people and are more effective and just or efficient or anything of that nature. Fascism says, you're special, you have enemies, I will fight your enemies and celebrate your privilege and your entitlement and your unearned credit. You will say, this nation belongs to me and people like me and our single culture, and that's safer and wiser and fairer and more just because our ancestors built this. And it works with people who have been taught to disregard history, who have been offered up a neutered version of history in which slavery is often not referred to as slavery, but is referred to as indentured labor. What are some of the words, the euphemisms that right-wing textbooks use? Because I know they're printed in Texas, but they're often distributed to states across the United States. Let's look it up. Euphemisms for slavery. Euphemisms for slavery. Bonded labor, debt bondage, attached labor. Okay, and then those textbooks also don't deal with what happened to end Reconstruction. They don't reference Jim Crow. They don't reference red line districts or other ways in which Black Americans were excluded from opportunities and also had their tax dollars disproportionately stolen from them, because whilst they paid the same tax rate as white working people, their tax dollars were not used in services that would benefit their children or their families. So white children were allowed to attend the state schools that consumed a significant majority of taxpayer dollars, disproportionately consumed taxpayer dollars. You would like to see Brian as a guest again, and his wife's aunt just passed from COVID. I will reach out to Brian. Good point. Interesting that cities with high populations of people of color were contested and claimed to be stolen? Yes, because that's always the easy path to steal from Black people, to disenfranchise them, to try and create rules that make it more difficult for Black people to vote by requesting forms of voter ID that GOP researchers have discovered are more likely for people of color to not have if they were born in an era where they were far less likely than average to be born in a hospital and to have access to the type of documentation that was a product of being born in those more formal settings. So whatever types of ID were statistically less likely to be in the possession of a Black voter, that was the type of ID that Republicans would insist be used to verify someone's identity before they could vote. Look, I've heard awful things of people with living relatives who remember having to do things like count the number of bubbles on a bar of soap or memorize parts of the Constitution. And that was the hoops that they were made to jump through before they were allowed to vote. So Trump said in his speech that we were now after COVID. No, you're in peak COVID, and you miss Brian talking to you. We have a few. It's funny how the little trolleys. Look, hello, Dwight. Are you excited about the caravan on the way? Funny they come once the Democrats take power back. Or funny that Fox starts manufacturing reports on caravans every time they want to whip up sentiment amongst people who are sufficiently primed with racist beliefs to treat it as a threat to national security that some poor, dispossessed climate change refugees or gang violence refugees approach the border. Now, the criminality with which the Trump administration has circumvented the law in order to mistreat those migrants and those type of refugees in order to curry favor with people like you, Jack, is a tragedy and an ongoing tragedy. The number of children who've been sexually assaulted in detention, the number of children who've been forcibly orphaned, including 4-month-old babies and infants then left under the care of 8-year-olds in unsanitary and disease-promoting conditions. That is a stain on the American conscience, which is not easily removed. And we are due for some sad times as the Biden administration get access to records, and journalists will be able to report even more on what the Trump administration did knowingly and purposefully to harm children as a deterrent to migration, when migration is something that has helped sustain a lot of American industries. American agricultural industries, many of those companies were not organized well enough to make a profit on their own without exploiting underpaid migrant workers. And farmers have been well aware that their workers had fabricated documents, but they still organized for those workers to pay tax by using individual tax file numbers as they paid their workers. And they organized amongst themselves to share their workers. If there was ever a raid on one farm, it was reported that there was an informal arrangement between farmers that if one farm got raided, the others would supply that raided farm, whose workers would all have been taken and jailed, with a share of workers from all of their other farms. It might be a compliment that you say I seem like a cult leader with my rhetoric, because key parts of cult leaders are affability and approachability. And that's why people always underestimate Trump and also Hitler before he was uncovered and history was more like, oh yes, clearly that man was a psychopath. In the moment when Hitler was rising to power, people went, well, that dude's a clown and he's not particularly articulate and his ideas are nonsense, etc. Now, the problem with that is that very affability and idiocy and passion is very attractive to a large subset of the population that at some level know that they have never been celebrated for their intellectual accomplishments. So feeling like they are not the favored or loved child, or not having engaged in levels of psychological healing to accept themselves for who they are. They may have some sterling achievements outside the realm of intellectual prizes. All of that chip on the shoulder, festering superiority complexes, that's harnessed by fascists to make an army that, even when they weren't openly rioting, an army that were intimidating Republicans to stay in line with a clearly very corrupt president who was hell-bent on destroying democracy and setting up a type of monarchical arrangement where he would stay in power, have a performative series of elections in which his children would also share power and succeed him in his American throne. So he needn't necessarily have been seeking a coronation ceremony with a crown, but Trump was organizing very heavily to steal the 2020 election, and so never face consequences for the crimes he committed against the American public. Trump may have stated he loves the uneducated because he understands that like him, they have something to prove. So we know from Mary Trump that Trump likely paid someone to take his SAT exams, that he understood that his own intellectual achievements weren't enough to get him into university, and that consequently he was a fraud and a phony in that world. It's been reported that one of his professors said that Donald Trump was the stupidest student he'd ever had, the displeasure of teaching. And it's very plausible. Trump, like many people with psychological adjustment problems, thought very highly of himself. His parents thought very highly of him as well. And he, on some level, knew that he did not satisfy the world's criteria for that. So he had mismatch. He had cognitive dissonance. I am great, but I have to cheat to get the world to acknowledge that I'm great. So that's not fair. It's not right. He's ready to go out there and punish the world and twist and cheat and force the world to acknowledge his greatness. What did you pass? Oh, we passed 400,000 deaths today. Yes, that is not surprising because COVID-19 has exponential growth levels, and the more contagious variants are now present in the US as well. Oh, Molly, we're past your bedtime. I'm sorry. This is only what the big kids do if they have pre-inauguration energy to expend. So I'm not concerned as much about other fascists being better organized than Trump. I think Trump's disorganization and incompetence is an asset to him as a fascist, but he is being resoundingly defeated in a public sphere. And look, his defeat was not preordained. His defeat was not inevitable. Americans worked really, really hard to oust Trump. There was a lot of organization. There was a lot of penitent backlash to the complacency and the passivity that had allowed for his squeaky thin election victory in the first place. In 2016, he lost the popular vote by 3 million, but he won by 77,000 votes in total, spread between Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So he talked about that as a record-breaking win. And indeed, it was equivalent to the number of electoral college votes that Biden has now. But Biden's victory means more because the electoral college system weights more heavily towards rural voters every time in history when there is a sharper divide, a more pronounced divide between rural and urban political views. So sometimes that rural-urban divide is not as pronounced because sometimes lower paid workers vote or flock more definitively to the Democratic Party because they're members of unions. So that's the Obama to Trump voter that we hear about that championed Obama and saw him as someone who would improve the conditions of working Americans. And when you read a case history now, the man who died from a heart attack during the Capitol insurrection, he voted for Obama. He was a union official, and then he became a rabid Trump supporter. And it highlights the pathway to brainwashing through exposure to media platforms such as Fox News, that people might retire and get more exposed to, or people might watch once and find it emotionally compelling. Because as per all fascist movements, emotions, when you appeal to emotions, you are able to circumvent logical judgments. Your wife bought something, it was a real splurge. Champagne for tomorrow night. Nice. You yourself know at least 25 people that have family members that have died from COVID. Yes. Well, I wonder if when Trump is out of office, if some of that spell is broken, because it was a spell of the appearance of invincibility. A lot of Trump's appeal was the unexpected. He unexpectedly defied the elites in winning the 2016 election. And that gave his followers an emotional high, a violation high that lasted for a long time and attracted fresh people who then believed the fascist propaganda, i.e. the fabricated, delusional propaganda that came out of the White House about how wonderful the economy was as a consequence of Trump's efforts. And the lie part of that was that the economy was already on an upwards trajectory as a consequence of the Obama-Biden recovery activity. So the stimulus packages that should have been bigger in 2009, but Obama and Biden at that point thought they needed Republican cooperation and compromised on not generating that much debt, public debt, and so were more moderate in their approach to reinvigorating the American economy after the George W. Bush instigated Grand Recession. Is that what they call it? Grand economic decline? I can't remember. All right. So Molly's caring for a sick cat. I hope the cat does well. Manchurian is worried about the 74 million people who voted to re-elect Trump. Yes, but some of their bubble is popping, which will leave them more mentally available to look around them and notice the massive pandemic that Trump didn't respond to, that Trump deceived the public about, and deceived them about the capacity and the obligation of the federal government to address that problem, which was a national problem, which shouldn't have been left up to the states. The Constitution does not mandate that all national problems be addressed at individual state levels. The president, the federal government, the executive branch has the power to use the Defense Production Act to step up America's response to national level crises, to commandeer companies and corporations to divert their activities to producing items that are needed to mitigate a crisis. So protective equipment, vaccine vial components, masks, to find and research the highest quality mask and distribute them to all Americans. It nearly happened. The US Postal Service nearly distributed 5 masks to everybody in April of 2020, which would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. if the federal government had allowed for that from the top endorsement of mask wearing at that critical moment in disease spread. I mean, every moment is critical in COVID spread. There's never an end to hope. There is always actions that can be taken, and Americans can still do so much to safeguard themselves, their families, and their communities. When you see people who've attended a mass function, a church meeting, a wedding, or a concert for Bow Wow, who apparently had a hit in the 1990s, and a lot of people went to his concert 2 days ago. When you see that, don't just get caught up in condemning the individuals who participated. They are, to a degree, the victims of a combination of poor individual choice and faulty, inadequate messaging from their federal government. They pay substantial federal taxes, but they were fed a contaminated bunch of nonsense about mask wearing and the nature of the pandemic, etc. So that undermines people's resolve everywhere. And for people close to the bottom of the continuum of resolve to make sacrifices to protect others, people who feel personally convinced that they are not at risk because they're young and healthy, and people who are single and really want to get out and mingle and have a biological drive almost to identify potential mates and vet them through processes of dancing and shaking their bodies at them and things. Those people's resolve, when worn down a bit, is then very easily broken. And with a new government, there will be more responsible behavior. Jeff says, guys, Limbus Van has champagne also. I'm so glad to be with you while you guys are tapping into the celebratory spirit. It's helping me do it as well to see you saying these things, because I've still had this gnawing pit of anxiety in my stomach about more potential violence from the Trump loyalists. John's wife is a teacher and has to work from home, as do you, but you're recording the inauguration. So many Trump supporters who have relatively lower levels of education are likely to have been negatively financially affected, and they will benefit from the stimulus relief checks that the Biden administration will facilitate, because they'll pressure Congress to pass it, and the Democratic majority in the Senate will pass those checks to be delivered to unemployed, to all Americans earning under 75,000, I believe, but also an increase in the employment insurance amounts for unemployed Americans to $400 a week, up from $300. And that's very important and will stimulate the economy significantly, because we're all connected to each other. And when more people are pushed into financial ruin, that brings down the economy. It has flow-on effects, I'm sure you all know. But also I don't want to perpetuate the mythology that Trump supporters are all uneducated, low-income people. Yes, they're less likely in general to have a college education, slightly less likely, because plenty of white college-educated people still voted for Trump in 2016, and a smaller number of them in 2020 voted for him. But a lot of people with relatively high incomes, even without a college degree, people who own their own businesses, voted for Trump because voting for Trump was a tax avoidance strategy. He was the champion of white Christian tax avoiders. Hey, this is gold analysis. I haven't seen anybody use that phrase. And that's a great summary and helps push back against that false understanding, often pushed by news organizations that are clearly owned by large, wealthy tax avoiders themselves, who perhaps want to spread that misunderstanding to just covertly push the narrative of Trump supporters are misunderstood, poor white Americans with economic anxiety. Trump supporters were more likely to be well-off white people, white Christian people who wanted to preserve their wealth as much as possible and not share it with others unless those others were going to be a white monoculture or a white dominant monoculture. Is Brian here? Brian, people are begging for me to talk to you again. Oh, and we got some spam that says, Jesus is God. You must be born again. And then what benefit accrues from being born again? Then you get everlasting life, blah, blah, blah. Jesus smiles on you. So Molly's feeling more secure about the inauguration, that some people might try to stir things up, but they won't be able to get anywhere near the area. How are we feeling about the safety and security of various Capitol buildings around the United States? John won't get any money from the checks, but you're for them. That's good. You have an understanding of how the economy is a cumulative product of everybody's financial well-being, and that when over time across history, wealthy people have pursued their own advantage to the detriment of others, when political power becomes so concentrated in the hands of the uber wealthy, when legislative changes are made that facilitate wealthy people being able to buy influence at a political level, then wealth becomes over-concentrated and it becomes a perpetuating cycle of power being purchasable. So power not being related anymore to a preponderance of people endorsing a political party. It just becomes people with money buying influence and buying advertisements that brainwashes a substantial number of people. And there isn't any more meritocracy of ideas. When the pendulum has swung too far in that direction, there is inevitably economic crashes, because wealthy people might focus so hard on accruing more money and reducing their outgoing payments of tax to pay back and reward and sustain the society that enabled their vast wealth to come into being in the first place. Then those poor people who begin to suffer from degraded infrastructure because of all the tax avoidance and wealth hoarding of the wealthy classes, the poor and the middle class begin to suffer more of an economic burden of either having to pay more tax themselves to make up for the deficit caused by wealthy people buying political access that reduces their taxes and reduces their expenditures and increases their trust funds. And then the poor people have less money and more people begin to fall off the cliff of financial viability. And if they become homeless, they then can't hold a job because they don't have a home base from which to shower and operate. And then they have reduced expenditure because they don't have a job and they don't have an income. So the people closest to them on the economic continuum are then more likely to lose their jobs as well, as there's less money circulating in the economy, which is to 70% of economic activity is consumer-related activity. Molly is hitting the cocoa again. The ones that stormed the Capitol were less likely to be well off. I haven't seen any statistical breakdown of the composition of Capitol stormers, but the people that have been arrested have been the son of a judge, a retired Air Force pilot, I believe, Lance Brock. He was retired from a high position in the Army. There've been some well-off people amongst those who were arrested. And the people that took a private jet down to the Capitol, what was the name? Jenna Ryan, who went there and said, yes, live or die, life or death will succeed. And then also said, you know who to go to for your realtor, Jenna Ryan. Have I appointed YouTube moderators? No. Would you like to be appointed as a YouTube moderator, Cosmic Rose? Maybe you could look up some of the steps that I have to take to appoint moderators and let me know. Oh, some of them think the rapture is starting tomorrow. Is that true? I've heard that 12 National Guardsmen have been removed, 10 for making suspicious remarks, and 2 for being actively affiliated with right-wing militia. Yes, overturning Citizens United is a key step. I hope that once Biden's in office, and now that the Georgian Senate race is resolved, we can resurrect conversations about increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court bench, because the Supreme Court bench, as it is currently configured, has just facilitated essentially the politically motivated murder of 13 people once William Barr reinvigorated federal executions, which had been suspended for decades, and then rushed through the execution of a lot of people in order to further inflame the loyalty of intoxicated on cruelty maggots, because of the politics of violation fascism, where you upset others and then your supporters get off on that ability to cause distress and to cause an overturning of expectation. Yes, Biden will not perpetuate the building of the useless wall, a wall that's worse than useless, that decimates wildlife populations, that causes the death of from dehydration of desperate migrants seeking to gain access to the country. You can have checkpoints, you can have patrols that then help pick up any migrants in the desert. You can funnel people into a regulated migration process without just putting up something that is a tribute to cruelty. And we can remind ourselves of the intentional cruelty of that project by remembering that Trump wanted to put spikes on top of his wall, spikes to harm and rip people's flesh. He wanted to put up moats with snakes or alligators. His staff in the Department of Homeland Security sometimes leaked those details. They were startled by them. They wanted Trump to see perhaps that it was not, that was cruelty and a step too far. I mean, they let Trump do his trial balloons to test things out. Maybe Trump himself allowed for a leak about that to see if it was going to repulse too many Republicans with relatively less loyalty to Trump, because he needed the full-throated loyalty of the maggots, the 100% committed maggots, and he also needed to retain the other Republicans as well who tolerated Trump because tax avoidance was their priority. So he needed to keep them on board and not to alienate them too much with any cruelty that was too naked, which is why he drove some of his child separation policies underground or curtailed some of that activity when even moderate America was rising up to condemn what they heard, which was the cries of children who had lost their parents. And that wasn't the cry of a child at daycare for the first time, although children at daycare for the first time will cry as if they're never going to see their parents again, because sometimes that's their understanding. You know, you're leaving me here with some new people, and they don't necessarily understand that they will see you again that afternoon. Oh, we really do have a crackpot, which is why you're keen to help me moderate, because we've got a full Q and nonsense person here. Yes, arrests are going to start any day now, and they've been saying it for years. Yes, one lady did take her friends with private jets. Yes, we saw that Steve has been pardoned, but I'm just focusing on this one because democratic policies of the murder of the unborn are straight from Satan. Judgment Day is coming. You almost want to start notifying the FBI now when you see someone that lost to hardcore religiosity. Interestingly enough, only a few days ago, a very large study was released highlighting that it's a myth that women suffer negative consequences from having abortions. So the people that like to whip themselves up into an emotional frenzy about difficult reproductive decisions to be made by women and their families are often trading in lies when they argue that it's psychologically debilitating for women to have an abortion. What's psychologically debilitating is to be a member of a religion that puts a high premium on emotionally controlling women through shame. To say if you have an abortion, you've murdered a sentient being. Arguably, there's some sentience in a small degree of sentience in unborn children in potentially the third trimester, where they can begin the process of differentiating between sounds, and they can begin to differentiate between human voices, etc. But if you categorize that as a fully sentient being who should have equivalent legal protections to their mother, thus allowing the law to forbid a woman from having chemotherapy treatment if she's pregnant and has cancer, or allowing doctors to refuse to treat a woman whose fetus is unviable or likely to be unviable in the very near future, a fetus who's dying, but you can't treat the mother, who then dies of septic shock, as happened in Ireland, prior to Ireland then voting in a large referendum to end their abortion laws, because Dr. Savita Halappanavar was an Indian-Irish dentist who died after doctors refused to treat her by ending her pregnancy when her unborn child was dying, was infected, and there was a risk that she would die herself, but they underplayed that risk to themselves because they were focused on the fact that there was still a detectable heartbeat from her baby, and they were focusing on their Catholic nature and the precepts of Catholic Ireland, as well as the law that you can't give people an abortion unless you can really, really confidently say that they would immediately die. Cosmic Rose suggests that I missed an ice cream party with Uncle Joe tomorrow above. What does that mean? Is that Joe Biden had an ice cream party? Yes, let's take a moment to celebrate that Biden is shutting down the Keystone Pipeline and that we can have some hope for the future. I really am so happy. It's such a psychological burden lifted off my shoulders. I mean, the survival of the human race is not guaranteed or anything, but the Republican Party is eating itself and splintering into Trump loyalists and people who are now a bit concerned that insurrection is not the best thing. So Republicans who have qualms now about Trump, which is not everybody, but a splintering is still a splintering and makes the Republican Party less of a potent political force in the United States, even with all of their cemented abilities to gerrymander districts because of their various electoral victories at the state level across various states in the United States, in no small part because of the prevalence of the defund the police message, and then Republican willingness to exploit the terrible political nature of such a message, which implies an end to policing and therefore an end to protection of the public. Really, the intended message we know was end police brutality or curtail police brutality, but the message of defund the police literally sounded as if it meant that government should bring an end to the existence of a police force, and making it a ripe political target for Republicans to gain split ticket victories from Republicans concerned that, yes, Trump might have some problems, but they had to safeguard their state legislatures from defunding their police at a local or state level. Yes, the lady who took her private jet to the insurrection would like a pardon. John may experience a rapture once Biden is sworn in. Actually, one of my favorite political commentators is Terry Canfield, who is a lawyer and author, and she writes on Twitter. And she points out that with two main political parties, it actually is a better dynamic for facilitating a degree of political compromise and negotiation that's healthy, because it creates a dichotomy, a pull this way, pull that way, and then work out like a rope, a tug of rope war that has two ends to it. And you introduce some third-party pieces of rope, and it's a lot more confusing and a lot less able for one party to exert influence and then to be followed by a corrective effort in the other direction. Oh, it's a function of your phone. You're only able to yell at us with caps lock. And yes. Do you know, okay, I'm going to bring up the clip of the man with experience in cult deprogramming now, who says that it takes someone who knows you personally, who loves you, who cares about you, to be able to break down the walls of cult identification, to help people stop putting all of their intellectual and emotional eggs in the basket of identifying with the lies disseminated by a cult, the lies that leach into who you are and make you commit all of your actions and all of your pronouncements into saying, this is true, there's going to be arrests, secret QAnon cabals are eating the children. I kind of flipped that a bit. I know QAnon doesn't accuse itself of pedophilia, but I think that is actually a fair accusation. To quote Hamlet, methinks they do protest too much. And some people affiliated with QAnon have been outed as people who were involved in the production and dissemination of child pornography, which is necessarily a product of child abuse. Kiki82 says, again, they have been able to manipulate us into their agenda, including Trump. Are you a victim of Trump's manipulation, Kiki82? When Molly says ripped up sacred native burial site, we're probably talking about the wall here, aren't we? Because I know that they chopped down some, I think, Joshua trees, some large cacti that had taken a long centuries to grow that large. But I do recall now coming across the idea that the sacred native burial site had been disturbed as well. And I'm so sorry that that wasn't featured more heavily in national discussion. Okay, so Cosmic Rose says, yes, she would love to help. All right. So I need to go into YouTube Studio. I'll try and do that. Get into the settings. And you've been able to appoint a few for your channel as well. Okay, great. How about we choice the party of God? Okay, yep. So you're one of the people that are a little bit lost. I hope, and I even pray in the sense that I'm a bit secular, but I'll pray in the sense of I'll send out my thoughts towards you. I don't really think that thoughts carry across the airwaves, but you can hear me tell. You can hear me express. Praying is a way of self-organization internally that can be shared by being vocalized or chanting or praying in a group setting, including a group internet setting. So I pray then that you are able to question some of your beliefs as to whether they're adaptive or maladaptive. Are you working with reality in a functional way, or are you still trying to hope that your nation become a monoculture with white Christianity retaining a dominance over everybody else? Oh, good point, Molly. Molly points out that walls keep citizens in too. I'm concerned that we might be wasting our time talking to Kiki because that syntax is not so much that of a native English speaker. And if you're a poorly paid Moldovan person who actually earns a few cents from pestering broadcasters, then we shouldn't waste our time talking to you. Less than 12 hours. Oh no, this happened right now. They just plowed through the burial site and arrested 16 Indigenous people. Just like recently, this week, today. That's unfortunate. What do we believe in, folks? It's disparate because we are not supporters of a monoculture America. So no, we're not pantheists necessarily. I don't think we have any pantheists here. We have people from a few different religious backgrounds. Yep. Well, we're not going to do the derisive laughter and the crying emoticons, because we're just going to hope that somebody who loves them helps intervene to help them, because we can't antagonize them into a place of greater intellectual flexibility. Engaging them in those kind of tug of wars. I heard this from Steve Hassan, the deprogramming expert. Just validates the dynamic of intellectually, emotionally gratifying themselves by saying, I fought with them. The act of fighting for them is intellectual masturbation. So let's not participate in helping them do that. Only I'm going to give myself a pass for a small syntax lesson, which is I like to tell people who don't understand that you are contracts into your with an apostrophe after you. So if you want to say you're dumb, you want to make the accusative you are dumb, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. And then that will really help you at an employability level once you know that and can illustrate that in your writing. So that's just my gift to you, because I want you to have a job and derive gainful income from employment. So there you go. So it was a couple of weeks ago. Okay. And look, KB, just to project forwards into the future, if there's 12 hours to a military takeover and arrest for treason, what will you change the goalpost to if and when that doesn't happen? I know that you're so invested in it that then you might just come up with something new, because I know that it's been years of saying that there's going to be imminent arrests. So when do you think you'll start saying the arrests will be imminent next, when they don't happen tomorrow? You think about that and just consider, because if you consider an exit plan for yourself, like, oh yes, then I'll admit that I was wrong and that QAnon isn't real and that it's a massive scam built to grift off gullible people or people people who've been primed by conservative media and Facebook being unprincipled enough to allow their algorithm to cater to fear and anger, to emotions that feature very strongly in conservative recruitment rhetoric. What will you do? What will you do then? Molly points out that if it would bring you joy, you may sign on to be one of my Patreon supporters. I think there's going to be room for more broadcasts going forward into the future, less daily drama because of Trump. So it might become more of a scheduled broadcast that has rhyme and reason and is every second day at a scheduled time, which I would enjoy, and many people would probably enjoy knowing when exactly to tune in as well. But that's what I hope for once Biden and Harris are in office. The first ever Black Asian woman to hold office at that high level. Oh, Boston Tea Party. I'm starting to get not attached to some of the trolls, but I get a little familiar smile now, like, oh, hello, you think it's worthwhile still to come back and listen to me. So I'm not fighting with you. There must be some reinforcement you derive from being here. Maybe it's that you just want to save us and recruit us to Jesus. But look, once Trump is out of office, maybe that will enhance your ability to look around and note the absolute devastation to America economically and at a health level, at a population viability level, of having an unprincipled criminal in office who sought to profit from the pandemic, who sought to further sharpen the wishful thinking of many of his supporters by promising them that the pandemic wasn't real, by asking them to not participate in mask wearing, in protective behaviors, in order to remove even visual confirmation that the pandemic was real and worth taking action to mitigate against. If you didn't wear a mask because Trump promised you that it wasn't real and you desperately wanted that to be true, you're still morally culpable for choosing to believe nonsense, but we can make an effort to understand some of your motivations so that we don't get caught up in escalating cycle of violence, that we don't dehumanize you. So you're human. It's a human process to get sucked into cult thinking sometimes and cult loyalties that aren't substantiated by reality. John enjoyed my grammar tips. Thank you, John. Somebody points out that Pompeo is now taking the MAGA mantle for the Q as weasel. Yes, I did notice that last night. Pompeo tweeted out that various things were anti-American, and one of those things that he tweeted from his official Secretary of State Twitter account was multiculturalism. Pompeo literally decried multiculturalism as anti-American last night. So at least that confirmed for me that, yes, he's very much on board with promoting monoculture, and he's doing it more openly as Trump is increasingly discredited because of his role in inciting an armed insurrection effort that sought to murder legislators and disrupt the formal certification of the election. None of the Q timelines are met. Well, that's always true. And the more they're not met, the more desperate becomes the need of the QAnon supporters to keep pretending that their reality is true, to keep pretending that they will be validated any day now. And they're serious about it, and capital letters, you can bet on it, girl. And they're running from a monkey on their own back, that monkey that says you've been made a fool of and you've been shown to be idiotic. The more that realization haunts them, the faster and harder they run to try and outpace it. That gnawing and growing understanding that they have devoted their lives to something ridiculous, as well as destructive. Yes, the reason why Trump never says Biden administration in his speeches is because he is part of a plot to grift off your foolishness, unfortunately. So if he's still victimizing you and you're still passing his speech for signs that he hasn't conceded, of course Trump hasn't conceded. He wants you to keep believing that the election was stolen from him. He wants you to keep paying him money. He doesn't even have to pretend to use it anymore for a campaign. He can just keep all of the money you send him because it's no longer bound by campaign finance law, because there's no more campaign. The election is over. So if you keep sending him money because you're like, look, see, he never concedes, he's still in the running, you'll be doing that forever, because as long as Trump can derive income from you, he will. You are like a juicy plum for Trump to pick off a tree. John says we would stay with you, Dav. And I think you mean that even once Trump is gone, you would stay as a viewer of my show. Thank you for expressing that sentiment, John. I love it. And Molly says, all the cool cats are doing it, right, Alan, in reference to patronizing my Patreon account. And we got an amen. Well, look, my marketing folks are working really hard. And Boxcar Boston. Oh, are you from Boston? Thanks me for my logical speech. You're welcome. Ouch. Should use this button to scroll down the comments more than the clicking one, because the clicking probably is irritating with the microphone. Now, NCA says, don't piss off Mitch. Do we have to worry about pissing off Mitch? I know lots of people say, oh, look, Mitch is making noises that compromise is necessary with Republicans. But Mitch would say that. Mitch will say whatever he can to grasp at power and imply that some kind of power sharing arrangement is necessary, that the will of the American people has expressed itself in the split Senate. Nope, that is a function of the Constitution, but it's a more racist part of the Constitution that was put in there as a conciliatory outreach program to slave owners that allowed states to each have 2 senators, regardless of the smallness of their population size. That was an affirmative action program for small states, meaning small, not in land size, small as in voting population size, small as in small numbers of white men owning large numbers of enslaved Black people who turned a high profit for them, who made them very financially rewarded for embracing slavery, and consequently often very personally committed to not giving up the right to own slaves and profit from slavery, and to therefore resist the northern states and their various pushes towards abolition and the abolition of slavery. Oh, I came across some very good historical information about that recently. Boston Tea Party says, so I believe when choose to be an American, you choose to be a participant in American culture. Sure. And are you saying American culture is white Christian culture, and that if you choose to be an American, you have to choose to be Christian? Is that what you're getting to with your comments, or is there something else about that? Will the Qs turn on Trump? They can't be fooled forever. Look, some people can. There's no law against it. And some Hitler adherents remained loyal to Hitler even after he had suicided in a bunker and the war was over. So some people's identity is so compromised, and they might have inadequate layers of social support of anybody invested enough in them as an individual to help pull them out of the intellectual pit that they and the Trumpists dug for them, and right-wing media dug for them. So there might be people who stay Q loyalists forever. There might be a few million of them. There are millions of them all around the world, actually, because it's a contagion that's spread via the internet. And the internet has global reach. But many of them definitely will be discouraged from adhering to Q literature or Q pronouncements once Biden's inaugurated. So that's definitely going to aggravate some of them and disincentivize others. Yes, we could have a little look at the Parler Takes Q account, because they are sharing quotes from QAnonymous Trump supporting people who are realizing at this point that they've been conned. Boxcar Boston is from Virginia. Nice. Dav can't get rid of us. She fed us knowledge, and now we hang around on the porch wanting more. Bless your heart. I'm going to try as hard as I can when we get to the US, which we may do by April if there's no significant incidents of domestic violence over the next few weeks. I think we'll proceed apace with our plans of moving to the US. And then you really won't be able to get rid of me. I will be as fully participatory as I can in the communication industry and potentially in politics as well. But I want to get involved in communicating and organizing. And Boston Tea Party is from California. And is a lot of your oppositional defiance disorder characteristics part of your disgruntlement at living in a blue state? I mean, there's plenty of red voting people or red inclined people in California. There's obviously some Republican areas, but perhaps you're frustrated with what you see as the erosion of the social fabric. Are you afraid that male and female identity is becoming blurred, that there's no longer a critical mass of social pressure for men to do manly things and women to perform womanly tasks? Are you worried that women won't take care of their families in the same way if we continue to go down this road of increasing inclusivity towards people with non-standard gender identity or gender or sexual expression? Because science does actually support a diversity of phenotypical sex expression. There's people who have XXY genes. There's people who have XXX genes. There's Klinefelter syndrome. There's androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is when you have genetically male composition, but due to some expressed gene problem, the surface of your cells don't interact well with gendered hormones. So your cells don't react when there's circulating levels of testosterone. So you have testes, but they never drop. And your body assumes the default expression of being a woman, but you don't know that internally you have no uterus. So you develop breasts, but you have no uterus, you have no vagina. And those people find out sometimes that they are, in fact, internally genetically male when they see a doctor about not getting their periods or not menstruating. And it used to be the case that medical professionals would recommend surgery to remove the internally contained testes that are in your abdomen because of the believed risks of genetic mutation from testes being in a warm internal environment instead of being in the cooler environment of being external to your body. But apparently a more recent development is that medical professionals are saying, actually, nope, you can leave those undescended testes where they are and they'll be fine, and there's not any robust evidence to suggest an increased risk of testicular cancer for those people. But some women who've, been contenders in beauty pageants have had that syndrome of androgen insensitivity syndrome, AIS. Mensch, Pat Barr is arguing that they will be the ones literally attacking Hannity and the ilk. Do you mean disappointed Q people? Oh, so the Q people who might turn on Trump and might attack Hannity because they will need a revenge narrative. They'll need a betrayal narrative to help them cope with their feelings of humiliation. They will need to not to think of themselves as stupid. They'll need to think of themselves as victimized by enemies. So they'll be very they'll turn that internal disappointment as outward hostility towards the people who tricked them. That would be interesting. It's been thought that Mitch might be able to lean on Dems from red states to compromise with Republican proposals. Republicans don't so much make proposals as obstruct Democratic proposals. And I think Joe Manchin, who I'm presuming is your chief concern here, is on board to a significant degree with recognizing the threat to democracy posed by Republicans. He's been calling for the ousting of some Republican senators who voted against certifying the election results. So I'm feeling perhaps better about that than you might be at this point. J. Kane 7 wants freedom of religion in the USA, which is great that you said that, because it reminds me to write down that when people say that, they're often subconsciously arguing for the right to maintain religious dominance. Because another favorite saying from people is your freedom to swing your fist ends close to my face. Like, you don't have the right to swing your fist in a way that's so close to someone else that it's threatening, nor does your freedom of religion extend to imposing limits to the civil rights of others with varying degrees of discrimination from others. Joe loves ice cream, so many of us are having ice cream tomorrow while Uncle Joe gets sworn in to party with him. Ah, yes, I remember after the first debate, I think, and Joe's granddaughter, Naomi, took a photo of some ice cream tub and said, you know, you deserve it, Grandpa. And like this whole ice cream tub with a spoon saying, we're leaving this out for you. So that's adorable. More than a year ago, I heard that wherever Joe Biden goes, his typical request, so his rider, is spaghetti pomodoro, raspberry sorbet, and a type of salad, caprese salad, which is typically some kind of white cheese, like buffalo mozzarella and tomato. And my husband said that's a child's menu. And I thought, no, that's adult enough. And it's got a little sweet treat at the end that's not too creamy, raspberry sorbet that's fruity and refreshing, and spaghetti pomodoro is a tomato-based pasta sauce. And anybody can do that. So you can put in a request for that anywhere, and hopefully people won't destroy your food. So I love that he's got something simple and consistent that he can request from anywhere that he knows he likes. That's a sensible man who doesn't push self-importance into his food choices. Molly notes that there is no American race. DNA tests never mention anyone is American. We're a melting pot. True. And whilst an original founding factor in American prosperity was the high profit margins associated with not only industries that directly profited from slave labor, but all of the adjacent industries that were able to trade in cheaper products, made cheaper because of the cheapness of labor, the labor component, the fact that slaves didn't get paid wages and that slaves were used to create further enslaved people, that their children were sold away from them as well. That was an original foundation of America's status as a global superpower, that they had this very profitable industry that was indulged, and a very profitable associated industries. But the conscience of some good people in America triumphed via the mechanism of the Civil War, and then lost again when Reconstruction efforts were sabotaged by effective coups on the American government once again, leading to more compromises being made with people who wanted at least to leave Black Americans as second-tier citizens who could be easily intimidated out of voting, and have only weakened legal consequences for those who dared to attack and kill and torment Black Americans who dared to exercise the right to vote or run for office. The second component of American prosperity that has replaced slavery has been migration, the ability of America to attract go-get-em, entrepreneurial-minded people who are prepared to leave familial ties and geographic loyalties behind them to seek opportunity, and to bring with them that tenacity of spirit and that commitment to the betterment of their families, that translates into a betterment of society in general, because that spirit is contagious in a good way. All boats are lifted on the rising tide of migrant zeal and zest for life. It's an antidote to the general entropy of life, to people who maybe achieve success for their children and then their comfortable, well-off children sometimes don't do as well in following generations because they're comfortable, and comfort can lead to apathy. But migrants are an antidote to apathy. So we don't just celebrate America as a melting pot because we condemn racism as immoral. We celebrate migration because it is not just altruistic to celebrate it. It is not just compassionate. It is not just womanly. It is pragmatic. It is sensible and humane. Craig Rockwell would like for the separation of church and state now, yes, to disempower the deluded people who discount the role of migration in American prosperity and well-being, and instead promote the idea that migrants are inherently threatening, which they take as confirmatory that 9/11 happened. And what does 9/11 prove? It proves that intelligence services need to be well coordinated, and that federal governments need to stay on the ball and not just get into office and deprioritize looking out for domestic terror threats or international terror threats. The Bush administration dropped the ball when it got into office. There was a contested election result. Their transition team wasn't as prepared, and reports from 9/11 have shown that the Bush administration chose to deprioritize terror awareness, that terror awareness had been a high priority for the Clinton administration, and the Bush administration consciously deprioritized it. And instead of meeting with agencies to coordinate, agencies that focused on intelligence, they focused on meeting with executives from oil and gas industries. The Bush administration focused on facilitating the grasp on wealth of the anti-humanity industries of fossil fuels. Oh, I've missed so many comments. All right, let's have a look. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do I plan to become an American citizen? Good question. It's likely, because we're moving to the United States and I plan to become politically involved in the United States. So for those purposes, becoming an American citizen would be necessary and useful. So Cosmic Rose says, scroll, don't click. Yes, that's fair. Why am I moving to the US? My husband has a job. He is a very intelligent, accomplished person with some very useful skill sets. So he has been headhunted in a positive way by a company with offices in the United States. And he's currently working for that company and has been for some time now. Only he's working from home, which I imagine many Americans continue to do. It's just that his home involves being halfway across the world. What was that Patreon website? www.patreon.com/DavChat. And DavChat is the logo up the top as well. Do I need to take the vaccine before I come? I would imagine yes. Oh, it's not just called opposition disorder, darling. You're missing a word. It's opposition defiance disorder. And look, just so you know, I do have some hesitation about employing terms that endorse the medicalizing of inherently human problems. I mean, germs are inherent to the human condition as well, but they can more easily be isolated. Whereas human emotional dysfunction occurs on a continuum and isn't as distinct as the presence or absence of a bacteria or virus. So, I just wanted a good way of describing the behavior of Trump supporters who appear to continually be stuck in a cycle of emotional gratification from defying expectations, from saying, haha, you didn't expect Trump to win, but he did. Suck it, lib people. And saying, oh, you didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition. Haha. Look, I get that that's fun for some people, but your fun and your enjoyment of that has caused you to disregard all of the damage that has been done to the people of the United States by Trump, who benefited from shaping the reality of his followers, who really gave up their own intellectual rigor, their own capacity to question events, because they would wholesale adopt any narrative proposed by Trump because he told them to distrust the media. They had no other sources of information because, like Hitler before him, like Mussolini, like fascist leaders always do, they begin by saying, do not trust the people who criticize me, they lie. Do not trust the Lügenpresse, meaning lying press. Do not trust the fake news. There's always different terminology, but the same thing is always trying to sever the bridges to accountability. Eleanor says, hi, Dav. Hi, Eleanor. Nice to see you. Boston Tea Party says, how degrading. Molly says, oh no, some will be queer. Yes, some people will be queer. Some people will be intersex. Some people will be all manner of things. Wow, this really was from long ago. I must be very behind in the comments. I'll try and speed it up. Modern science enables females to share genetic information now without a male cell. So you're being subject to a naturalistic fallacy if you say the only valid way of participating in having a family is by male-female reproduction. And I can see how that would buy you a lot of friends and supporters and followers to say, we believe in the old ways. We don't believe in modern reproductive technology. We don't believe in modern medicine. We don't want to wear masks or have vaccines. There's a set of beliefs that, to begin with, will make you lots of friends and bring a lot of people on board with an inflated sense of superiority. But the world is outpacing you. The world is outpacing you, and ultimately Trump, your champion of white patriarchal Christian supremacy, has been defeated at the ballot box. 60 court cases have confirmed his thorough defeat, and the Supreme Court would not hear his case because it was so impoverished in argument and evidence. Oh, that's a good phrase. I am so hoping to be a writer on the back of all of this practice in talking and communicating with people. Impoverished in argument and evidence. And I'm going to write down the phrase as well, white Christian tax avoiders. Or should I write monoculture tax avoiders? Does monoculture, is that a term that you think is accessible or is a little bit not accessible? Cosmic Rose wants to know if Devin Nunes near Fresno. Is his county near Fresno? I don't know. I'm not familiar with Bernard Goldberg. You believe he created the foundation of two truths with bias. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe you would like to explain it more. Oh, I have a reasonably loyal audience that likes listening to me. So I too am in a self-perpetuating gratification loop whereby I provide a service and people engage with that service and people even support me on Patreon. If anybody pays you for your opinion, then perhaps you would have some grounds to criticize me on. But I have a relatively loyal and supportive audience. Ninja Buddha, thank you for providing us, as usual, with the opportunity to reinforce the truth about the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment is a constitutional mandate that guarantees you freedom from government oppression. So then the government is not supposed to in any way constrain your ability to stand in the market square and proclaim your opinions. Now, this is not the market square. This is not a open public forum. This is a private business that has terms and conditions. So do not mistake do not mistake yourself for being in a protected category. You are not someone who is being muted because you are gay. You are not someone who is being muted because you are a woman or muted because of your skin color. You are only muted because your uninformed opinions are distasteful, but also dangerous. It is dangerous to give you a platform that you have not earned and do not deserve. It is dangerous to even engage with you too much because that indulges in your love of conflict. It is dangerous to listen to you speak because you spread ignorance as if it's a contagion. And you have no right to disrupt this broadcast. You have no right to be heard on this platform. The First Amendment doesn't guarantee you an audience here or a platform. Cosmic Rose wants me to let my children have ice cream tomorrow to celebrate Uncle Joe. Well, my husband suggested that as well. He suggested that we go out to dinner today as a family because when it's nighttime for us, it will be tomorrow morning for you. Oh my gosh, I'm getting all emotional about that. Oh, it's so close. That's so close. So we will be going out and we will be having pizza today and we will share one lava cake. This is what we do for birthdays, and we will do it for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being inaugurated as well. We have something called a lava cake, and it's a chocolate cake that's probably got very high component of butter in it because it's molten on the inside, and it comes with a scoop of ice cream, and we cut it into quarters, and everybody in our family gets a quarter and a share of the scoop of vanilla ice cream, and that special fancy birthday dessert celebration, but also celebrating the ousting of a tyrant. And the fact that I'm emotional about this now is reminding me of finding out when the election results were confirmed when I was in the middle of a broadcast and somebody called it. Which was the first news network that called it for Biden? We were all just waiting on people to call those swing state results because the trajectory was evident and Joe Biden's victory was imminent, but there was extra hesitancy because it was occurring in the context of a president who had already begun his campaign of vilifying the process of democracy in the US, who was already pretending that his victory was assured. And the Fox News desk calling Arizona relatively early was key to challenging that narrative that he was winning that day and that the results were suddenly overturned. So when people describe what have been the points of the saving of America in the recent months, on the election day, Fox calling Arizona at a point which disrupted Trump's efforts to sell the fake narrative that he had won the election. That was critical. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the 4-3 ruling to retain the certification of the Wisconsin election results and not to overturn them and discount them. Trump was relying on Republican judges to do just that. But fortunately, one Republican judge did not vote in the expected way. And there were 3 Democratic appointed judges. Normally, the rule of law is not supposed to be a Republican versus Democratic thing. That's supposed to be at least an element of just objective reality. And one Republican judge was able to do that on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, because that would have begun a cascading series of dysfunction as well if the Republican Supreme Court had successfully overturned the results of that state and said, nope, throw out our results or throw out the votes of people in majority Black districts. That would have given Donald Trump Wisconsin, and that would have encouraged other voters to pressure other Republican officials in other swing states and given him an edge. Donald Trump has leaned on everybody at all levels of government. He has leaned on his supporters to believe that the election was stolen and they had to fight to save their country once and for all. Donald Trump leaned on the Republican Secretary of State, and we heard him tell Brad Raffensperger that he just needed him to find 11,780 votes. He just needed that. Yes, Molly points out to Ninja Buddha as well that point about the First Amendment right only protecting you from government overreach. Molly likes the menu for the children. True, America was all Native American first. I love that we're using the term Native American now and that the term American Indian has been pushed out of discussion, because Indian was just part of what the misapprehension by Christopher Columbus that he had reached India, and doesn't belong in the list of phrases by which we refer to each other. Oh yes, Indigenous Americans the preferred term now, Molly? I defer to your judgment. Ew. Ninja Buddha went away and made a YouTube account to come and badger us some more. How dare you? Freedom of speech in the USA. Right, so are you defending your understanding of the First Amendment? Because you need to update your understanding if you want to be correct. If you have no compunction to be accurate in your pronouncements, then sure. Liberal women bombed the Capitol in 1983, but here you are opening your sewer, demonizing people you share a country with, and silencing those who speak the truth. How dare you? Wow, that's quite a fulsome pronouncement from Ninja Buddha. We're not used to that level of denunciation, but I guess Ninja Buddha's worked out that YouTube has more space for commentary as well. So Cosmic Rose, I definitely will really work hard on appointing you as a moderator to YouTube. I'm trying to sign in to YouTube Studio, but that's a work in progress. Ninja Buddha, what is he talking about? I presume it's a him from the tone of voice, which could be sexist of me, but I think I'm okay at the moment with that cultural stereotype of thinking that men are often culturally conditioned to be very confident with their own assertions. Does that make me masculine? Because I'm quite confident in making assertions as well, aren't I? Anyway, it's sweet that Ninja Buddha says, I share a country with you. I share an interest in your country, and I have a visa that entitles me to live there, but to move. I've just delayed it, that's all, because your country is still being ravaged by a pandemic and was ravaged by leadership that willfully, criminally, negligently chose to pursue not helping with the pandemic, chose to pursue a course of undermining public health messaging, which is a very damaging thing to do in the face of a pandemic. And Trump did that on purpose to profit from people's gullibility and people's focus on tax breaks and the value of their stock market portfolios for those Trump voting Americans who still either had stock portfolios or aspirationally believed that Trump would allow them to have stock portfolios, that Trump would facilitate their becoming wealthy. Oh, that's a great phrase, Alan. I'll write it down. Immigration invigorates America. Love it. Invigorates America. Yes. In the US, political support for immigration has almost always been pragmatic. I'm sure that's true because fundamentally, tribalism is a very important factor in motivating people's actions and people's attendant rationalizations. We often act and then construct a post hoc rationalization, but sometimes rationalizations precede behavior. So we have to know that in history there's both directions. Okay, yes. Molly prefers Indigenous Americans, so I will use that. Tomorrow will be very emotional for lots of people. And I've seen people who have experience with being personally abused by violent domestic relationships say to be prepared even for negative emotions, just because if you're used to being abused, your body can be primed to expect more abuse. And when the abuse doesn't happen, or violence and terrorism, domestic terrorism doesn't happen tomorrow, you might almost experience a letdown, just that your body was conditioning you, your brain was conditioning you to defend yourself, and so to expect that. Just that was an extra point to highlight the potential complications, the emotional complications of tomorrow. But if you don't personally have a history of being domestically abused, then maybe you don't have to prepare as much for those type of negative emotions and can just relax into the positive emotions of joy and relief and hope. And yes, or choreographed is a great word. Trump choreographed, they stole the election rubbish for 3 months before voting. And indeed, he was choreographing it in 2016 as well, and saying that he thought that they would cheat, and that's the only way he would lose the election against Hillary Clinton, would be if they stole the election from him. And at that point, he didn't anticipate winning in 2016, but he understood the money-generating ability of a victim narrative to say, I should have had something, it should be given to me. So people who identify with me, who feel validated by my existence and by my public profile, give me your money to bond us closer together so that you may feel that we are closer psychically connected. You people who feel that the elites have always misjudged you and underestimated you. And every time someone mocks my spelling or my vocabulary or my level of political correctness. What's a better phrase than that? Because political correctness is what the anti-migrant people use. People who mocked Donald Trump's affinity for modern principles of inclusiveness and multiculturalism. Everybody who was very attached to a white victimhood grievance narrative and felt validated by Trump's championing of the need to maintain white Christian dominance and a white Christian monoculture in the United States. They wanted to give Donald Trump their loyalty and their support and their gratitude and their money. Yes, so you oppose Columbus Day because that's Indigenous Peoples Day, and Columbus was a slave trader and sold female children, and was generally not the hero that some history books have presented him as, or at least it's an important data point to acknowledge the slave trading and the sexual trafficking and the exploitativeness and the probably purposeful exposure of people to disease as well. Was Christopher Columbus involved in giving Indigenous Americans infected blankets? Let's have a look and see if he did that. Christopher Columbus. Someone says that there's no evidence that the scheme worked. The infection on the blankets was apparently old, so no one could catch smallpox from the blankets. That's one thing from history.com. So the question is, did colonists give infected blankets to Native Americans or to Indigenous Americans as biological warfare? There's evidence that British colonists in 18th century America gave Indigenous Americans smallpox-infected blankets at least once, but did it work? The warfare against Indigenous Americans was horrifyingly brutal, but one method they appear to have used, perhaps just once, shocks even more than all the bloody slaughter: the gifting of blankets and linens contaminated with smallpox. The virus causes a disease that can inflict disfiguring scars, blindness, and death. But there's only one clearly documented instance of a colonial attempt to spread smallpox during the war, and there's no clear historical verdict whether the biological attack worked. Okay, but what it has reminded me of is that I almost call Trump a biological terrorist, in that telling people not to wear masks and holding events in defiance of the advice of his own scientific advisors, indoor events such as the party to celebrate Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, where multiple people contracted coronavirus from that event. Which reminds me as well, has anybody seen the video today of Kellyanne Conway abusing her daughter, just calling her names and swearing a lot and saying that you can't catch COVID from the president? But Kellyanne Conway has a book deal, gets TV appearances, gleeful, gossipy courage because people can profit off her. Well, one hopes that she becomes so toxic that people stop that, and that people tell Bill Maher that he has to stop listening to or having Kellyanne Conway on for appearances. Columbus didn't give infected blankets. Smallpox arrived in Europe later. And Indigenous American slavery is never mentioned in history books. Yes, I've never seen it mentioned at all anywhere. California in Los Angeles took down the Columbus statue about 2 years ago, and you watched it live on Periscope. There you go. Well, that's something to look up at. If you're watching Dav, please smash the like button on your way in or before you leave, which helps the YouTube algorithm rate her higher so more can see her more easily. Thank you. That's a lovely comment. Thank you, Cosmic Rose. Yes, I knew what you meant. All right. Now, is everybody okay with hearing Kellyanne Conway be very abusive? So just block your ears if you have been exposed to domestic abuse and if this would be triggering for you. Okay? Because I'm going to press play now.
You're never going to record on fucking thing in your life. It's going for a forensic analysis. One fucking bit for you to tell people I'm a bitch.
What?
What?
There's something wrong with you.
Yeah,
You're
there
mocking
is.
me.
You think I'm mocking you? I'm trying to have a conversation with you. You know what you've done to yourself? Do you know what you've done to yourself?
I'm 15.
No. You're fucking immature. Before you get it all over the sheets that I cleaned.
Can you stop?
No, you don't ignore me. Asshole. I text them all day long. And they're paying attention to you because they know that you need extra help.
What'd you call me?
What do you want to know?
Hypo?
Hyper. No, I said hyper. You know from the doctor's hypo. What do you want to know?
Hypo?
Hyper. No, I said hyper. Get my mom, please!
Can you please, Mom?
No, you can't! I want you out of here! You were making you mad. Some 15 fucking year old made you mad. You're never going to record another fucking thing in your life. It's going for a forensic analysis. One fucking bit for you to tell people I'm a bitch.
Oh,
What?
come back to the beginning.
What?
So Kellyanne Conway is a bit pathologically insane, abusive parent. Oh, and this is more. Okay, and this is the bit where Kellyanne Conway also says that you can't catch COVID from the president. Oh, listen carefully.
Recap with Kelly.
Asshole, you beat the shit out of my door. I can get you taken out of here today. Stupid ass thing you always say. I wish.
Because then
you
she
know
would.
what? Fuck you.
I told you that. You don't fucking listen. What the fuck is wrong with you?
I didn't get coronavirus from the president. Everybody got coronavirus from somebody who flew in for that event. That's not true. You didn't get coronavirus from the president. You're wrong. You only knew what people thought.
Oh, I don't think she's saying you can't catch coronavirus from the president. She might be saying they didn't catch coronavirus from the president.
You're wrong. You only knew what people thought of you.
No.
You don't know.
Hang on.
Flew in for that event. That's not true. You didn't get coronavirus from the president.
Oh, wow, she says you can't catch
You
coronavirus from
only
the
knew
president.
what people thought of you. You don't know. Because they knew you got other problems. Take you, by the way. The only place that'll take you, that you weren't going to post about your family anymore. You just lie to everyone, and everybody sees it. Everyone sees it. Grateful bitch. And since you're lucky, your mom's pro-life. Fuck you! I thought it was over! It's over! I thought we had who's following you, dumbass.
Okay, so that's a level of psychological pathology that's, I mean, I've listened to it a couple of times now, so I'm not as shocked anymore. But for some of you, if that's the first time you've heard it today, that's probably quite distressing. That person's a mother, but they're unbalanced. They can't take care. She can't take care of her 15-year-old daughter or be emotionally supportive. She's swearing. She's gaslighting her daughter by emphasizing, what people think of you, i.e. no reflection on her own actions. She's just acting as if her daughter Claudia is making it up that she's being abused, which is sort of a classic narcissistic reverse blame. And she's telling her daughter to be grateful that she's pro-life, i.e. be thankful I don't kill you. And yes, Kim's comment, wow, she's a raging evil psycho, is a fairly common comment on the internet right now. And people are tagging child and youth services all over the place. In other videos, Claudia apparently says that Child Protective Services failed her. She mentions a caseworker by name, but says she's resigned to nothing happening on that front because her parents are too high profile. And other people have noted that her father has left their family and moved out, but that they won't get a divorce because of being Catholic. So essentially, child abandonment by her father and left with her mother, has elements of psychosis. The sweetness in her voice, she's like, oh, no, that's not true. People flew in for that event. Somebody sick flew in from that event. You can't catch COVID from the president. Yes, so she was not looked after by Child Protective Services, probably because she didn't have a lot of evidence of physical assault. And I've heard that Child Protective Services are not as likely to act in the event of verbal psychological abuse, which is sad. And I would assume that aggravating that circumstance is the fact that her parents are high profile, her mother associated with the president, a high profile aide to the president of the United States, which has only 11 hours to go. So with any luck, I mean, I know people have discussed Claudia Conway moving out before, and it was said as a joke, can she move in with Mary Trump? I would love to ask Mary Trump to do that seriously, for real, and for Claudia to be able to pursue legal emancipation, because she has evidence, strong audio, video evidence of abuse. Yes. Dav, who was the pizza guy that died from COVID after the super spreader event? I'm not familiar with a pizza guy dying. You mean Herman Cain, who died? He died after the Tulsa rally, which was one of the first rallies that was held during obviously when the pandemic was much more of a topic of popular discussion. Okay, so Cosmic Rose says, be careful, YouTube might ding you for bad language, which is fair, even if it's on a recording. That's okay. My principal audience is on Periscope at the moment. And I'm going to encourage people who like this broadcast to look for me on Haps. My username there is Davcat, Davkat. And yes, follow me on there if you want a continuation of engaging with this broadcast, with me as a broadcaster, because that's the platform I will be using when Periscope shuts down on April the 1st, or the last day of Periscope might be March the 31st. So yes, Herman Cain died. He was a black American, and as such, I imagine, very exploited at a tokenistic level by the MAGA movement, who relish embracing wealthy black people who sign up to that movement. And so individual black people like Diamond and Silk, Kanye West, all benefit significantly at a personal level, I would imagine. Kanye West got millions of dollars in personal income protection. What are they called? The PPP programs, the programs that were supposed to help small businesses. And Kanye West, a millionaire, got millions of dollars in aid. And yes. Oh, Pat, that's why I've been struggling with you a little bit, isn't it? Although you despise Trump, haven't Dems sold out to corporate donors and shifted right? Well, the American people, within the context of a electoral system that's been heavily rigged towards conservatives via a product of democratic voting complacency after Obama's historic election victory, that Democratic voters didn't turn out to the same extent in midterm votes. Republicans began to dominate state legislatures and increasingly organize redistricting, gerrymandering that gave them more power or further reinforced Republican power, which moved the whole Overton window of political debate over to the right. So that's not a sellout on the part of Democratic politicians. That's called a cultural movement that was essentially driven by blacklash, a backlash against a black Democratic president, because Fox News and the white fossil fuel affiliated magnates that own Fox News and other conservative platforms capitalized on the priming of some Americans with racist attitudes to then hitch that wagon to a type of populism that pretended that Obama wasn't fixing the economy, that drove a negative association with the aftermath of the Republican-inspired recession, or the Great Recession, to Obama's actions. So falsely tied Obama to that economic collapse that he was actually instrumental in lifting America out of, and created a hotbed of delusional loyalty to Republican populism, which isn't so much for anything as it is anti-anything proposed by Democrats, because you have the potent mixture of racism compounded by economic gullibility, to say, don't look at the evidence of the Obama economic improvement, just work with the racism that you already have and any gullibility that you have there already to climb on board this popular movement to just denounce any proposals to benefit the public. So denounce the Affordable Care Act. It's socialism. Anything to help people is evil, which is just all reactionary populism, just called hop on board with this superiority narrative that says the people in power are terrible because things aren't ideal. That means blame Obama, and we are the TV station for you to watch if you want to keep enjoying the feeling of blaming others. And that will give you on some level psychological reassurance that things can be solved. You just have to get rid of those people. So just keep blaming and blaming and blaming, and that will make you feel empowered and make you feel like an end is in sight, provided you get Obama out of office. So then you get Trump in office and you immediately feel more full of economic confidence because you've ousted Obama, and he was obviously terrible, and the Affordable Care Act was terrible, Obamacare was terrible. Oh, except maybe you like the Affordable Care Act, but Obamacare is terrible because that's the brainwashing that is pursued on multiple conservative outlets, Fox Daily News, Fox nighttime shows, and then, of course, Rush Limbaugh as well, and other conservative radio hosts with their supporting roles in the brainwashing as well. And blame migrants for stealing things from you. They're not entitled to it. They haven't earned it. They're not contributing anything. They're just coming and take. So all of that brainwashing rhetoric was very prevalent. And you can't remove racism from that mix, but fundamentally an oppositional narrative is part of it too. Just criticize who's ever in power and yearn for a comforting father figure who will get rid of all of these compromises that is involved with democracy, and yearn for an authoritarian figure. So the more exposed you are to negative commentary about your country, the more, regardless of external circumstances, the more you create a yearning in some vulnerable people, particularly people raised in a patriarchal environment who haven't rejected that environment, who are still sympathetic to the idea that you need a man at the head of the household, an all-powerful man who dishes out discipline, and that modern society relies too much in their mind on trying to cultivate individual values so that you grow some of your own values through your own experiences and don't just have top-down imposed values. I mean, life is always a balance. There's an inherent tyranny to parenting where you have to change somebody's nappies and put clothes on them, and you don't just let them make their own decisions. But, there's a balance. Everybody normally finds their own place on that balance. Organized religion often helps people feel that they have a map to that. And a lot of parents, modern parents, feel like they're frontier builders in charging forwards without the old techniques of smacking. And it's all supposed to be positive reinforcement. And a lot of people have reservations about that. And you hear that culturally echoed in concerns about giving everybody a performance trophy, etc. That was a long bit of talking. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed my answer. HAPS broadcast to Twitch and YouTube also. Good. The PPP program, yes. What argument did you have with your buddy today? Oh, about Democrats not being culpable for the Overton window push to the right. And Bernie was ridiculed by the MSN because he was catering a lot to white working class interests, but he is a bit of a communist in terms of loyalty and understanding of historical and political history of the world. And his ego is likely a significant factor in Donald Trump's victory in 2016, because Bernie could have supported Hillary Clinton's narrative to America about how she was being, her campaign was being sabotaged by Russian accounts on social media. And Sanders knew that to be the case from his staff members. This is available in an interview that Bernie participated in with Vermont Radio. So if you Google Bernie Sanders, Vermont Radio, we knew what we knew when we knew it. You will come across an article of that name, and embedded in the article is a link to that interview with Sanders where he gets testy when asked to answer a listener's question of why didn't you go public to support Hillary Clinton's account if you knew prior to the election that there were Russian-based accounts disparaging Hillary Clinton and calling her a murderer on the Bernie Sanders Facebook page, and your staff, by your own admittance, told you that because your supporters wouldn't have believed it from Clinton's account, but would have believed it from Bernie Sanders, being honest about that. Hello, Paul, do you call it good morning? And yes, Obamacare gave 20 million people access to healthcare and was effectively subsidizing a lot of poor people in predominantly red states through the tax-paying contribution of people in more economically productive blue states. And yet, ironically, red states and residents of red states are the people most subject to unremitting Republican propaganda. All right, oh my goodness, I've been talking for so long. I've got to go to the gym. And maybe hang out with a husband. Are you saying Obamacare is a blessing for you but has some flaws? Yes, but those flaws are likely to be a product of compromise with Republicans who made some of its provisions, or who obstructed some of the provisions, the proposed provisions of Obamacare. So with any luck, under an administration where Biden, the Democrats lead the executive branch, Democrats have a majority in the Senate and the House, so the legislative branch, and hopefully do something to address the murder facilitating Supreme Court, stacked with Trump appointees at the moment. If that's also changed by appointing more people to the Supreme Court, then America will be in a much more empowered state to accomplish good that will benefit all of the residents of the United States. So thank you to everybody for being part of this broadcast today. I've enjoyed your company and your engagement. Happy Inauguration Day today, because it's morning. It's morning for you all. Maybe you can have a nap. Trump's leaving the White House by Air Force One. What time in the morning do we think he's leaving? Around?
It was quite early.
Quite early? Do we think 8 o'clock?
No, before 8, I think.
Yeah. So thanks so much, everyone. Add funding to the Affordable Care Act each year and let capitalism do its thing. Well, yes, although I think a lot of people now will be more open. Well, people who are responsive to world events or American events will learn soon under Biden that having a proactive federal government that uses its powers to help people and to help mitigate crises and to support people will appreciate more the role of good oversight in dampening the nastier side effects of unfettered capitalism, and will create a more pro-social manifestation of capitalism. Because those communists are often very ideologically motivated, and ideologies sometimes have their failings. Pragmatism is sometimes thrown out the door, and those people can become so committed that they start to become murderous as well. I know the Trump rioters were roundly condemned for having built a noose and a gallows within sight of the Capitol building. But I would like to note that communist sympathizers did that in New York as well. They built a gallows, or no, they built a guillotine. Was it for Bill de Blasio? It was for somebody, but communists really hyped themselves up into murderous state as well. And I would just like to add the provision that I know they're far less numerous than maggots and far less of a potent political force, particularly because Bernie Sanders was defeated in the primary and his worst supporters have just been gnashing their teeth to various levels since then. I'm sure there's a lot of sane Bernie Sanders supporters who voted for Joe Biden, but the more extreme ones have been making their voices felt on the internet, criticizing Joe Biden for sanctioning a $1,400 check to supplement the pre-delivered $600 one to total $2,000 as per his promise, and they've been saying that's not adequate or not fair. Hopefully, they will be less motivated to complain or to undermine the Biden administration at this point. I think so much of America will be just suffused with gratitude to be in a place where their government is actively helping them live and reducing the risk of death and impoverishment. Alan enjoyed the DAV marathon. It was a DAV marathon today. Thank you so much, Molly. Not too strict and always positive. We're talking about parenting. Showing options and helping them learn to choose the best answer helps form a logical habit. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Cosmic Rose, I will seek to inscribe that on my heart as a parent. Paul, thank you, Paul, is asking people to please share and retweet. Kimchi says, thanks for an interest and informative chat. Alan says to enjoy my afternoon and hope you guys have fun. Is it 10:30 where you are, Cosmic Rose? Okay. Yes, and there's my marketers. Thank you so much. As always, I'll leave it up for a second longer. If it would bring you joy to become a Patreon supporter for as little as $2 a month, join my merry gang of Patreon supporters and know that you are fueling my commitment to continuing to provide this service, which I do anyway out of a commitment to democracy and to an existential solving of the existential crises that beset us as the human race, but it helps me be regular with my broadcasts. Thank you once again, everybody. Take care. Looking forward to the inauguration tomorrow and the safety of everybody concerned. Mwah. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.